Hello there. This is to be a lecture on Saint Thomas Aquinas's cosmological arguments for the existence of God. This is to contrast them with the vertical arguments, the horizontal arguments for the existence of God that we looked at earlier. And these are vertical arguments, and I hope that will become more clear to you in a moment or two. So to begin my presentation, let me share my screen. Okay, that didn't work. Right now, where did you go? No, it's not working. Let's try this here. And let's try this. This. Yeah. I think I see some positive things happening now. And indeed, I think I do see some positive things happening now. So if I did this right, you should be looking at a screen that says evidential arguments for theism, cosmological argument, vertical. Okay. So let's see if I did this right. So a cosmological argument, remember, is an a posteriori argument. A posteriori is a Latin phrase that is sort of the opposite of a priori. Remember, we've talked about a priori, which means independent of experience. Well, a posteriori means dependent upon experience, or it's a fancy Latin way of saying empirical. Again, based on what is available to us through observation. So the cosmological argument is based on observation and attempts to prove the existence of God by claiming that God is a transcendent theoretical entity needed to cause or to explain some observable feature of the world. Now, there is a difference between reasoning to the thing which causes the universe and reasoning to the thing which explains the universe. The first, is an unquestionably metaphysical project. And this is the project undertaken by Aristotle, undertaken by Aquinas, and the pre-modern philosophers in general, and also as well as neo-scholastic philosophers who are contemporaries with us now, so they are past the modern era, but they're still adhering to the methodologies of scholasticism. The latter is more of an epistemological project, and this is what we see beginning in the works of philosophers like Leibniz and Spinoza, and they're talking about the principle of sufficient reason, the reason which explains why we have a universe at all. Now, William Lane Craig, contemporary philosopher and theologian that I've mentioned to you before, he champions the kalam cosmological argument, which makes use of neither the principle of sufficient reason nor tries to talk about a contemporary cause of the universe. This version relies on the premise that the universe cannot be infinitely old, but rather it must only be finitely old. So if the universe had to begin at some point in the finite past, they reason, then the universe must have a cause. And this I refer to as a horizontal type of cosmological argument. I'm thinking of the timeline as being a horizontal line, and at some point in the distant past, there was the beginning of the universe, and that can only be explained by something which antecedes the beginning of the universe, and that would have to be something like God. Thomas Aquinas's version of the cosmological argument do not rely on the notion that the universe is only finitely old. Aquinas is willing to accept for argument's sake that the universe is eternal, with no beginning in time. Now, of course, Aquinas was a Christian, hence the Saint Thomas Aquinas, right? And so he does not believe that the universe is infinitely old. He believes that the universe did, in fact, begin at some point in the finite past when God created the universe ex nihilo, out of nothing. However, Aquinas did not think that this could be proven as a matter of philosophy. This was something that he referred to as an article of faith, which he thinks is not provable by philosophy. He also felt that it wasn't disprovable by philosophy either. So reason could neither establish nor contradict the idea that the universe is finitely old. And so philosophy has to remain mute on the subject. Again, he thinks as a matter of faith, the universe is only finitely old, but he didn't think that this could be proven on the basis of philosophy. I should note that because he also thinks it can't be disproven on the basis of philosophy, to hold that the universe is finitely old is not irrational. It just neither can gain rational support nor rational disconfirmation. Rather than a horizontal cosmological argument, Aquinas is offering what I call a vertical cosmological argument, or arguments, plural. He actually offers a few. Now, it's not entirely clear to me why he, Aquinas, did not believe that he could prove that the universe was only finitely old. He was aware of the kalam, cosmological argument, and the argument and an argument pointing to the creation of the universe in a finite past would have been more consistent with his Christian faith, rather than Aristotle's claim that the universe was eternal. It may have been that he did not want to suggest that Aristotle had been wrong about such a fundamental feature of the natural world. Aquinas, I believe, did claim that there could not exist an actual infinite set, which is one of the main claims of the kalam cosmological argument. An infinite past would commit us to the existence of a completed infinite of finite moments of time. But perhaps he did not believe that an infinite past, this is he, Aquinas, perhaps Aquinas did not believe that an infinite past would commit one to a completed infinite series of past moments, since in a sense they didn't exist all at once. So if they all evaporated after they passed, then we wouldn't have an infinite series at any one moment in time. I don't know. I'm surely speculating here. I should mention that his contemporary, St. Bonaventure, did seem to support the kalam cosmological argument. So it's not clear that it was against Christian teaching or Christian theology or monotheistic theology, but Aquinas rejected it. Bonaventure seemed to accept it. So in modern philosophy, the modern rationalist philosopher Gottfried Leibniz, who we will not speak about a great deal in this course, his version of the cosmological argument was more of an epistemological argument. He was reasoning to the thing that he believes necessary to explain the world. Since the world is not self-explanatory, there must exist something that is. So if the universe is not self-explanatory, then there must be something which is self-explanatory, and that leads us to the theoretical postulate of God, the self-explanatory being. However, St. Thomas's cosmological arguments are traditional metaphysical arguments. He's not reasoning to the thing, he is rather reasoning to the thing which he thinks causes the world. The world is not self-caused. Indeed, nothing could be self-caused. To be self-caused, you'd have to exist prior to your own existence. Well, of course, that's absurd. So nothing is self-caused. Therefore, it must be caused by something that is uncaused, and that thing must exist simultaneously with its effects. So this is one of the interesting differences between the horizontal cosmological arguments and the vertical cosmological arguments. The horizontal cosmological arguments are reasoning to something that existed in the past and does not necessarily exist simultaneously with the present. The vertical arguments are arguing for something which exists in the present that accounts for the present rather, and is simultaneous with the present moment. So Aquinas is a very interesting figure. Well, that's kind of vacuous, but he, as a point in the history of philosophy, he's trying to accomplish a number of things. He's trying to accomplish a synthesis between Christian Neoplatonist philosophy and pagan Aristotelian philosophy, between more broadly faith and reason, and between theology and philosophy. So just a quick sketch of what's going on at the time. You may recall, or you may know, or maybe you don't, that in Christian theology, the idea was that after Christ died, that he would eventually return to establish his kingdom here on earth. And many of the followers, early followers of Christ, thought that this would be accomplished within their own generation, that there would be people alive within the living memory of Jesus who managed to see the second coming of Christ, where the Messiah returns and establishes the kingdom of God here on earth. That didn't happen, right? But it did set this idea that what we're waiting for is the return of Christ. And so a Platonic philosophy that says, look, this world is not that important. This veil of tears that we suffer through is not the real world. We need to keep our thoughts and our minds and our eyes focused on the heavenly, the eternal objects, the forms, etc. That was very appealing to early generations of Christians. It should also be mentioned that after the death of Alexander the Great, Aristotle, who was considered by his fellow Athenians to be sort of a Aristotle, an Alexander sympathizer and disloyal to some extent to Athens, he was not a popular guy. And in fact, they had him charged with impiety. And he fled Athens because he said, look, I've seen that movie. I know how it turns out. I'm not going to stick around to do that again. He says that he didn't want Athens to sin a second time against philosophy by putting him to death in the way that they had put Socrates to death. So he left. Well, after that time, the work of Aristotle became less and less influential, while the work of Plato became more and more influential. So much so that over the next several centuries, Platonic thought developed into a kind of religion, a very influential religion in the Mediterranean world called Neoplatonism. And Neoplatonism carried along with it all of the basic themes of Platonism, you know, that there are the forms and there is the form of the good. The form of the good gets transmuted into the one, and the one is sort of a kind of God that is the source of all being, all knowledge, all love, all beauty, etc. And so this was Neoplatonism, and Neoplatonism ultimately became, as a religion, very influential in the writings of other Mediterranean religions, including Judaism and Christianity. And we can see echoes of Neoplatonism in the writings of Christian scriptures and Alexandrian Jewish scholars, etc., Philo of Alexander, etc., where they're very much influenced by these Neoplatonist ideas. Notice the Gospel of John, for instance, begins with, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And of course, the Greek for that is logos. In the beginning was the logos, and the logos was God, and the logos was with God, etc. So the idea there is that rational principle, that which philosophers, including Plato, had been talking about for centuries, is the nature of God and is the rational structure of reality and is the key for understanding reality. So Neoplatonism became very influential in the early centuries of Christianity, where Aristotle's thought did not. In fact, his works kind of fell into obscurity in the Latin West. Now, in the Arab culture, his works were preserved in Alexandria in Egypt, and then they were copied and retained and brought back into the Arab world. And there were Arab thinkers that were very much familiar with the writings of the larger corpus of Aristotelian writing. And they incorporated some of his ideas into their own philosophy, and they worked on and commented on his philosophy. So Aristotle became rather influential in the Arab world in a way he wasn't as influential in the early Christian medieval world. But then, as perhaps you know, the Arab culture developed and spread across the coast of northern Africa, and then ultimately into the Spanish Peninsula, and set up rather sanctuary cities or whatnot. And in these sanctuary cities, Muslim scholars, Christian scholars, Jewish scholars would come together and share texts and ideas and have debates. And so Aristotle was sort of reintroduced into Western Europe, but he was reintroduced at a rather interesting time. Because remember, the early centuries of Christianity, well, they were sort of keeping their eyes heavenly, keeping their eyes towards the spiritual world, and not so much worried about this veil of tears that we happen to be living on, because they were all waiting for the second coming of Christ. And it went on, century after century. And then we got to the year 1000, and they thought, oh, good heavens, 1000. Well, that's a pretty big round number. Surely this will be the second coming of Christ. And so they expected this sort of thing to happen. But the year 1000 came and passed, and nothing. Like, well, we lost count of the years there for a while. Maybe we just lost track. Let's wait a few more years. So they waited a few more years, nothing. So then they thought, oh, wait a minute. The Holy Lands are still in the hands of the infidels. Maybe we need to regain the Holy Lands in the name of Christendom. And so they had these crusades to go and conquer and regain and recapture the Holy Lands in the name of Christendom. And they were successful initially. And still nothing. So by the late 10,000s, early 1100s, they're thinking, hey, maybe we're going to be here a while. Right? And, sure, if I'm renting, I don't put down wall-to-wall carpeting. But if I'm going to be here a while, then maybe I want to fix things up a little bit. Maybe I want to look around. So this Platonic philosophy of don't worry about this veil of tears, it's unimportant. Keep your mind and ideas and thoughts and eyes heavenly. It was getting a little stale. And Europe, Western Europe, was ready for something new, something a little worldly, something that engaged us in practical benefits of making our lives more comfortable, more successful, more flourishing. And as if on cue, the Arabs are delivering Aristotle to Western Europe. And a key linchpin for this were the Jews, because Hebrew was so close to Arabic that the Jews were able to translate the Arabic texts of Aristotle into Latin, which made them then accessible to Christian scholars as well. And so now you had a group of scholars that all had access to the Neoplatonic ideas of the past, to the reintroduced ideas of Aristotle. And so there was this sort of rich stew of philosophical ideas coming from classical antiquity. So this is why I say that one of Aquinas's functions, goals, was to try to synthesize Neoplatonic Aristotelianism, Neoplatonic Christian philosophy, as perhaps best represented by St. Augustine, but others as well. And this newly reintroduced Aristotelian philosophy. And how do we make those two things go together? Because we know that Plato and Aristotle disagreed about a lot of important ideas. So synthesizing these two great philosophers was going to be a challenge. But then more broadly, how does one develop a synthesis between faith and reason? And again, similar idea, how does one bridge a gap between theology and philosophy? Well, this is what Aquinas tries to do. And I mentioned all of this big, long story to tell you that his arguments for the existence of God are one example of how he tries to do this. He tries to show that if you are a good, meaning efficient, accurate, careful philosopher, you will know that God exists. Hence, faith and reason, and theology and philosophy, for that matter, far from being antagonistic, are actually complementary. They complement one another. This was one of his guiding principles. Aquinas works with a model of proving the existence of God, which originates with the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle. Aristotle did not believe in creation because he thought the universe was eternal. It always existed this way. But nevertheless, Aristotle himself did argue for an unmoved mover. So both Aristotle and Aquinas talk about an unmoved mover. But the notion of movement was somewhat broader than we would understand it today. So that phrase can be a little misleading. Aristotle believed, and Aquinas accepted, that any change whatsoever, is a movement. It's a movement from something being potentially X to actually X. So for instance, I might have a pot of water, and that pot of water might actually be cold. Water is cold. It's cold in actuality, but it could be warm, it could be hot. So it's hot in potentiality. In other words, that pot of water contains within it the potential to receive heat and to become hot. That is, it could be moved to actually being hot. But notice what it takes to move that thing from potentially hot to actually hot. Well, it needs a mover. And notice that mover has to be external to the pot itself. Something external to the pot which moves the potentially hot pot to being actually hot. In other words, there must be something which actualizes the pre-existing potentiality. So this is the broader metaphysical system of Aristotle and Aquinas that sometimes gets lost if all you concentrate on is the word mover. I'll continue to reference movement since this is the word that Aquinas is using, as did Aristotle. But bear in mind that each had a broader view. Each has metaphysical commitments to the doctrine of potentiality and actuality. This means that they were more talking about an unchanged changer or an unactualized actualizer. So something which actualizes but doesn't need to be actualized, or something which changes but is not itself changed. Aquinas refers to God as pure act, actus purus. So aside from God, everything else is a composition of act and potentiality. There is that which it is in actuality, there is that which it is in potentiality. But for God, God is only that which exists in actuality. God does not have any potentiality whatsoever. God has no potential. Imagine being God's high school guidance counselor. God, I'm sorry, but you have no potential. Aquinas redrafts Aristotle's unmoved mover argument into his own 5 ways, his quinque viae, his 5 ways to God, or his 5 ways to prove the existence of God. We're going to look at the first 3 ways in some detail. The first argument really is Aristotle's argument for motion, and he makes no bones about it. Aquinas says, this I'm taking directly from Aristotle. He begins with observation, and this is key for the cosmological argument. It's grounded in observation. It's not an a priori argument in the way that the ontological argument was. Rather, it's grounded in observation. And so he says, voila, there are moved objects. There are objects that have been moved or changed or actualized, we might say. But let's stick with moved. In order for any object to be moved, it has to be moved by another. Nothing can move itself. It has to be moved by something external. Both of these propositions, Aquinas holds, are evident to experience. So again, the cosmological argument is grounded in experience. These are necessary universals known to active intellect, according to Aristotle. It is because our mind is so keyed in to the nature of reality that we can see certain necessary features of reality. And one such necessary feature of reality that our minds grasp is, in order for anything to be moved, it has to be moved by another. Now, can this be an infinite system of movers with no end? So every moved object is moved by another object, which is moved by another object, which is moved by another object, et cetera, with no end. Well, yes, if you mean in time. If you mean in time, could it be that the universe is an eternal string of moved movers moving other moved movers? Aquinas is willing to grant, for argument's sake, that yes, this is possible. We can consistently conceive of an infinite series of moved movers. For every moved object n, there is a moved, it is moved by another moved object, n minus 1, which in turn is moved by another moved object, n minus 2, and so on, and so on, and so on. And perhaps, for all we know, this goes on through eternity. Moved objects being moved by other moved objects. But can that be the whole of the story? Moved objects moved by other moved objects? Well, both Aristotle and Aquinas say no. Imagine a bicycle chain, right? Why I wrote it or drew it with 11 chains rather than 11 links rather than 10, I don't know. I wasn't paying attention, I suppose. But notice we can only see one portion of that bicycle chain at a time. We can't see the whole of the chain. We can only see the links, and only some of the links some of the time. So let's say that our vision is limited to link 1, 2, and 3. And I'm trying to speculate, why is 1 moving? Well, 1 is moving because it's being pulled by 2. And why is 2? Well, 2 is moving because it's being pulled by number 3. So far, so good. Now, let's imagine that this is genuinely an infinite series of moved movers. 1 is moved by 2, 2 is moved by 3, etc. We can speculate 3 is moved by 4. But let's further imagine that this is infinite, meaning not that there's an infinite number of links, could be, but imagine this, that there is no beginning, there is no end. So I've numbered them 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, but there is no first link in the chain. It's a chain without end, no beginning and no end. And so if I ask, why is number 11 moving? Well, number 11 is moving because it's being pulled by number 1. So for each proximate action of motion, for each proximate link in the chain, I can explain why each link is moving. Each link is moving because it's being pulled by the next link in the chain. 1 by 2, 2 by 3, 3 by 4, 4 by 5, etc. But for that matter, 11 by 1. On this model, each link derives its motion from the previous link, which in turn derives its motion from a previous link, and so on and so on. But note, no link in this infinite chain has the ability to move itself or has the ability to move anything else on its own. Each borrows its ability from a previous link. So 2 borrows its link to move link number 1 from link number 3. And link number 3 borrows its ability to move link number 2 from link number 4. So each link has no moving efficacy of its own. It gets the ability to move things from something else. In this case, the previous link in the chain, but that opens an important question. Therefore, the model is incomplete and unmodified. It leaves us with an infinite regress, an irreducible mystery. And we talked about infinite regresses a couple of lectures ago. The only thing that can stop the infinite regress of moved movers is something which is able to move things, but does not itself need to be moved. It can bestow motion without having to borrow the ability to bestow motion from something else. So again, number 2 borrows its ability to bestow motion on number 1 from link number 3. But it can't be, it's an infinite series of borrowed, bestowed motion. There has to be something which bestows motion and doesn't borrow it from something else. Each link in the chain, the moving part of the system, has a proximate cause for its motion, which we can see. Notice this is part of the world we observe, moved movers. And for instance, that's all we ever witness. We only observe derived motion. Thus, the model lacks a cause, that is the fact that the whole chain is moving. What explains that? Well, the only thing that could explain that would be something not that we see, but something we can reason to. There must be an unmoved mover, that, again, which bestows motion, but doesn't borrow that ability to bestow motion from another. Well, then, that either leads to the position that there are no moved objects. If all that existed were moved movers, well, then that would lead to the idea that there are no motions whatsoever. And of course, that's absurd and contrary to observation. Or that there must be, in addition to the moved objects, a mover that is itself unmoved. There must be an unmoved mover. Thus, there must be a mover that is radically different than the moved movers that we observe on a daily basis. So there's that which we observe, the moved movers, but then there must be something radically different to all of that. Something which bestows motion, but doesn't need to borrow it from something else. Again, what we witness is derivative motion which is derived from something else. But if there's derivative motion, we can be absolutely certain there must be a source of underived motion. Again, that which bestows it, but doesn't need to borrow it from something else. We observe the links in the chain, but this observation rationally compels us to hypothesize that to which we do not directly observe. Something radically different than the moved objects, something outside the chain, something which is transcendent. Now, if we're literally talking about a bicycle chain, we might talk about the gear, which is explaining why the links are moving. Right? Something outside the system of links, which explains the motion of the links. But then we'd have to talk about the pedals, and then we'd have to talk about the legs, and then we'd have to talk about the rider, and then we'd have to, so you keep pushing back, and you have to get to something which is transcendent, not only of the things we see, but beyond the things we see, beyond what we can observe. But that means despite the fact that we do not witness it directly, we can know that there must be a source of underived motion. This outside mover force, Aquinas calls the prime mover. So that's Aquinas' name for it. And that all men call God. So he begins with observation. There are moved objects. He moves on from that to say, in order for any object to be moved, it has to be moved by another. It cannot be the case that every moved object is moved by another moved object. That would lead to an infinite regress. Therefore, there must exist an unmoved mover. So that's his argument for motion in sum. Now, frankly, I prefer the term unmoved mover rather than Aquinas's prime mover, since my term, or Aristotle's term, unmoved mover, is less likely to give rise to the misperception that Aquinas is thinking about something which is temporally or sequentially first. He's not. The primacy that Aquinas is talking about is not a temporal primacy or even a sequential primacy. It's a sort of metaphysical primacy. And here I say, the primacy he's talking about is a sort of metaphysical primacy. Underived source of derivative motion. The unmoved mover is prime in the sense that being the current source of all current motion. So the unmoved mover does not exist sometime long ago in the past and explain why there's motion today. No, the unmoved mover must exist today to explain why there's motion today. All the links exhibit derivative motion. But if there is any derivative motion today, then there must be a simultaneous source of motion, which is itself underived, again, today. So for Aquinas, the act of creation is not over. The act of creation is an ongoing process. It never stops. The moved objects we witness would not move at all were it not for the unmoved mover, which we do not directly observe. Recall, no link in the chain on its own possesses the ability to move any other thing. Thus, moved objects are ontologically dependent upon this unmoved mover, but not the other way around. Now, while Aristotle and Aquinas are represented the most frequently let's try that again. While Aristotle and Aquinas are represented most frequently as arguing from the literal notion of motion, the argument can be fashioned with reference to any and all sorts of change. A change is a motion from a thing that what it was to what it subsequently became, as I've already mentioned. But for a thing to be changed, move from potentially hot to actually hot, it must be changed or moved by another, something which is actually hot. But since this is so, in addition to changing changers, such as fire, there must be something which is actual, but does not need to change, an unchanged changer, or an unactualized actualizer. And of course, Aquinas is assuredly delighted that this proof seems consistent with certain scriptural passages. So from James, we get every best gift, every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father in lights, with whom there is no change, no shadow of evil. Or similarly from Acts, we have God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is never far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. The second argument is the argument from causality and follows very much the same route. He begins with the observation, voila, there are causes and effects. Now every effect has an effect. Now every effect has a cause. There we are. We know that some causes, indeed, all causes we witness, are the effects of other previous causes. So they are caused causes. Could this chain of caused causes extend infinitely backward into time? Yes, says Aquinas. For every caused object n is caused by another caused object n minus 1, which in turn is caused by another caused object n minus 2, and so on and so on. So you could have this sort of infinite series of caused causes. But can this be the whole of the story, where every caused thing is caused by another caused thing? No. Perhaps you saw this coming. Why is this? Such a system only references things which derivative causality. A derives its causal efficacy from B, which derives its causal efficacy from C, which derives it from D, etc., etc. But we can know without a doubt that if there is derivative causality, then there must be an essentially different source of causality, namely underived causality, a cause which bestows causal efficacy without having to borrow it from something else. And what would that be? Well, you have it, an uncaused cause, and that all men call God. The notes that I have in purple or in blue, these are largely notes that I put in because of the course I teach at the upper level in philosophy of religion. And I will not hold you in this introductory to philosophy class responsible for these notes. I'm not forbidding you from looking at them, but I'm also saying you don't have to pay particularly close attention to them. I won't be quizzing or examining you on these notes. So I'm going to skip through them here. I just didn't want to create two different lectures. It would be too difficult to keep track of. So now we're on to the third argument. We're only going to do the three. So the third argument is the argument from contingent objects. And this argument I like to render in the form of a reductio ad absurdum. Logic assures us that if we have a valid argument with a false conclusion, then we can be certain that at least one of the premises is false. So that's the nature of validity. Again, validity says if the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true. But if I come up with a valid argument with a false conclusion, it means at least one of the premises is false. A reductio ad absurdum is an argument technique where one begins by assuming what one wishes to disprove, and then shows that by valid inference, this assumption leads to an absurdly false claim. So if I can show that my initial assumption by valid deduction leads to falsity, then it demonstrates that my initial assumption itself was false. So that's how I like to understand Aquinas' third argument for the existence of God. And so I put it this way. He begins with observation. It's an empirical cosmological argument. There are contingent objects. Voila. How do I know this? Look around. I have a hand, I have another hand, right? I have a computer mouse, I have a keyboard. These are all contingent objects. And remember what contingent means. Contingent means it depends for its existence on something else. It doesn't exist necessarily. It exists contingently, dependently upon other things. Facts of history, other manufacturing processes or whatnot, right? I exist because my parents decided to have children after all. Had they not decided to have children after all, I wouldn't have existed at all. So I'm not a necessary being. I'm a contingent being, just as my computer keyboard or my computer mouse is. But now we move on to premise number 2. Everything which exists is contingent. Now, I call this atheist assumption number 1. And atheist assumption number 1 is that everything is contingent, meaning There are no necessary things. There is nothing which must exist, sort of like Kant's assumption, right? That everything which exists could go out of existence, that nothing must exist. Anything I could imagine as existing, I could imagine as not existing. Therefore, everything is contingent. But it follows from number one and number two, the definition of contingency and the claim that everything is contingent. It follows that premise three, everything could go out of existence. Well, that's the very nature of contingency, right? If everything is contingent and contingent means could go out of existence, then it follows that everything could go out of existence. But number four he introduces, which is a little bit different, or a departure now, where he says all real possibilities occur in an infinite amount of time. Now, what does he have in mind here? Well, the shorthand notion there is it's a metaphysical principle that says, given enough time, anything that is actually possible would occur. So my sort of silly example I give for this typically is I said, imagine that I decide I want to go on vacation at Las Vegas, and I've never played roulette, and I've been curious about playing roulette. And so I go to one of the casinos and I saunter up to the roulette table and I say, I'm going to play 33 black. So I play 33 black on the roulette wheel, and they spin the wheel and the little thing bounces, boom. Oh, I lost. It wasn't 33 black. Well, that's how it goes sometimes, right? So I'm having a nice time. I got a complimentary drink from the bar. I'll play 33 black again. Again, 33 black. Dinka, 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 dink. Boop. Oh, it doesn't come up 33 black. But now I'm starting to become obsessed. And so I start playing 33 black regularly, without fail, spin after spin after spin. And I've been there an hour, and I've been there 2 hours, and I've been there 5 hours, and 33 black still has not come up even once. So I'm getting a little peeved. And I call over the floor manager and I say, excuse me, but I've been playing 33 black on this roulette wheel for the last 5 hours, and it hasn't come up a single time. And she says to me, oh, sir, I'm terribly sorry you're having such a string of bad luck. Here's a coupon for the buffet. Well, what am I supposed to say? Yes, okay, fine. So I continue playing 33 black, and I'm there 24 hours. And in 24 hours, 33 black does not come up even once. So I call the floor manager over again. And I say, okay, look, now I've been here 24 hours. I played 33 black every time, every spin. It hasn't even come up once. And again, she says, oh, sir, I'm terribly sorry that you're having such a bad run of luck here. Here's another coupon for the buffet. So now imagine I don't just play for the rest of another 24 hours. I play for a week. I play for a month. I play for several months. In fact, I won't leave this friggin' roulette table. I've lost my job at FIU because I didn't come back from vacation. I've lost my home because I had to mortgage it so I could still play 33 black. Right? And after several years of playing 33 black, it hasn't come up once. What am I now starting to suspect? I'm now starting to suspect that this roulette wheel is rigged. There is something which is preventing 33 black from coming up. And I call over the floor manager, who has got to know me pretty well by now. And I say, I think this roulette wheel is rigged because I've been here for all of this time and it's never come up once. Well, they call in the gaming commissions and they do a big inspection and they can't find anything wrong with it. No, sir. We've done a thorough investigation and there's nothing rigging this. You're just totally unlucky, but no, nothing is rigging this. And of course, I've only been there for a couple of years, and who knows, maybe on the next spin it will come up. But now imagine I just haven't been there a week or a month or a year or several years or a decade or 100 years. or 10,000 years. Imagine I've been there an infinite amount of time, and I've witnessed an infinite amount of spins of this wheel. And after an infinite amount of time, 33 black never comes up. What can I now know? Asks Aquinas. I would have him ask. What can I now know? Not just suspect, but know that it's not a real possibility. Something is rigging it. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it is, but something is rigging it. Something is preventing 33 black from coming up. Because after an infinite amount of time, all real possibilities would occur. If this didn't occur after an infinite amount of time, then it's not a real possibility. However much it might look like a real possibility, it's not. Okay. So we move on then. Premise 5. An infinite amount of time has already occurred. Now, does Aquinas, the philosopher, or rather, does Aquinas, the Christian, believe that an infinite amount of time has already occurred? Well, as already previously mentioned, no, Aquinas, the Christian, doesn't, because he thinks God created reality at some time in the finite past. But who is committed to the idea that an infinite amount of time has already occurred? Well, anyone who thinks that the universe is eternal. Specifically, anyone who denies a creation. That would mean this is sort of an atheist assumption then. So that means in this moment, an infinite amount of time has already occurred. Well, now Aquinas has everything he needs. That means then that all real possibilities have occurred. This follows from premise 4 and premise 5. But if that's true, then it follows that everything has gone out of existence and nothing exists. That follows from premise 3 and premise 6. But then I didn't have room to put it on the table, so I'm doing it now. Premise 8, there are no contingent objects. Why? Well, that follows from premise 7. Nothing exists. But then we have premise 9. There are contingent objects and there are no contingent objects. That follows from the conjunction of premise 1, where we started, and premise 8. Okay, but premise 9 then, or conclusion 9, is a logical contradiction. It's a literal absurdity. It cannot be the case both P and not P. It cannot be the case that both contingent objects exist and it is not the case that contingent objects exist. So this is a reductio ad absurdum. We started with the idea that there are no necessary objects, and where did we end up? With an absurdity. Well, unless we did something logically wrong here, that shows us that our initial assumption is false. Aquinas says that there must be something which is necessary, which has necessary existence. And in other words, number 2, premise number 2, nothing is necessary. Everything could go out of existence, is simply false. So remember the table that William Rowe introduced us to. Again, on the right or upper column, no, upper row, we have things that exist and things that don't exist. And then on the left-hand side, we have things that can switch sides and things which cannot switch sides. And we identified quadrant B1 as listing those things which exist and could not fail to exist, those things which have necessary existence. Well, what Aquinas is saying is that B1 is not empty. B1 must have an occupant. There must be something which has necessary existence. This is the only thing that could keep the universe from winking out of existence. If everything was contingent, then nothing would exist at this time. Aquinas says that there must be something which has necessary existence. If number 2 is false, something has necessary existence, then not everything could go out of existence. There must be a necessary being. And that necessary being is God, or so Aquinas would have us believe. Now, shifting gears just a second, William Rowe, the 20th century philosopher I mentioned earlier, introduces us to the principle of sufficient reason, but he characterizes the principle of sufficient reason as having two aspects to it. Now, he claims that the principle of sufficient reason is necessary for all cosmological arguments. I don't agree with him here. I think that, yes, that's true for Leibnizian style cosmological arguments, but not for Aristotelian or Thomistic or even kalam arguments. So I disagree with him there. But the principle of sufficient reason is certainly very important for Leibnizian cosmological arguments. And as William Rowe characterizes the principle of sufficient reason, he says it really has two parts. One part says that there's an explanation for every object. So for every object which exists, there's an explanation for where it came from, what explains how it came to be. But there's an explanation also, this is part B, an explanation for every positive fact. So for every true claim, there's a reason why it's true and not otherwise. Why is my coffee cup on my desk and not on the floor, or not in my office, or not in the sink? Well, there's a reason why it's on my desk, an explanation, and explains why it's not on the floor, or why it's not in the sink, or any number of other possible places my coffee cup could be. So now imagine the universe is an eternal string of contingent objects. Humorously, we might say chickens. So that history is the infinite series of contingent objects producing other contingent objects. In other words, chickens making chickens. Note, every existing object, that is, every chicken in the chain, every link in that chain would have an explanation. That is, every contingent object would be explained by this model. And thus, this model satisfies principle of sufficient reason, PSR-A. Every object has to have an explanation. Well, in this case, it does. Chicken 1 has an explanation. Why? Well, it was created by chicken 1 minus 1. And that one has an explanation because it was created by chicken 1 minus 1 minus 1. So we have an infinite series of chickens causing chickens. Nevertheless, this model is unsatisfactory given PSR because there would still be something left unexplained. Namely, why is it that there are and always have been contingent objects? Why is it that there are and always have been chickens? Here's a positive fact. There are and always have been contingent objects. But why? The contingent objects themselves cannot explain this fact. So there must be something outside the system, transcendent of the system of contingent objects, which explains why there are and always have been contingent objects. Essentially, this line of reasoning is asking, why is there something rather than nothing? That there exists something is a positive fact, and as such requires an explanation. This is principle of sufficient reason, part B. And the argument goes on to say that the best or even the only explanation would be God, something transcendent of the system of contingent objects. So here's a reading of the first 5 ways of the Thomistic cosmological arguments. 1, the system of objects exhibiting derivative motion can only exist if there's a source of motion which is not itself derivative. Therefore, there must be something outside the system, transcendent force mover. The system of objects exhibiting derivative causality can only exist if the source of the causation is itself non-derivative. Therefore, there must be an outside transcendent cause. Third, the system of contingent objects, derivative being which derive their existence from something else, can only exist given a source of existence which itself is not derivative. Therefore, there must be some outside transcendent necessary being. In the Leibnizian reading of these same objects, you might say replace the idea of the cause with the explanator, right? The system isn't explanatory, therefore there must be a source of explanation. The system of causality isn't self-explanatory, there must be an outside source of explanation. The source of contingent objects is not self-explanatory, therefore there must be a transcendent source of explanation. Now, we didn't talk about the last two arguments, so we won't in any great detail, but I'll just mention them to be complete. The fourth argument depends on there being objectively true judgments of comparative judgments, rather. Therefore, if there is a better, then there must be a best. The fifth argument is often referred to as a teleological argument. The universe exhibits intelligent direction and adherence to rational principle. And that can only be explained if the universe is being directed by an intelligence or a power that has this in an underderivative sense. Let's go back to the fourth argument for a moment. The idea here is that there can only be grades of perfection if there exists a most perfect, with reference to which these grades of perfection stand. So there could only be a better if there was in fact a best. And if we can know that there are better things, more beautiful, less beautiful, more perfect, less perfect, more good, less good, well, then that presumes that those could only happen if there is a best of all things. In a sense, they have derivative perfection. And if there is derivative perfection, there must be that which bestows perfection and doesn't need to borrow it from something else. In his fifth way, sometimes this is interpreted as an argument from design similar to that of William Paley. However, I do not believe that they are really that similar. I see this fifth way as much closer to his other cosmological arguments, that the universe or objects in the universe exhibits intelligence, order, or logos. But this is a derived intelligence. They don't have this intelligence in them. They have this intelligence bestowed upon them. And if anything has derived intelligence, then there must be a source of underived intelligence to bestow it. So notice, even if the universe were merely a single hydrogen atom that rationally and regularly obeyed certain laws of hydrogen atom nature, that in and of itself would have to require an explanation. So it's not the complexity of the design, like William Paley would say. It's the mere exhibition of intelligence and intelligent order or directedness. And I think that's what Aquinas is on about in his fifth way. So problems. Well, number one, the conclusions of his argument, prime mover, first cause, necessary object. Aquinas says these we call God, but taken individually, they certainly are not the equivalent of the theistic, oh God. Further, even taken jointly, they may fall short of the gods that religion teaches of. Response. Well, Aquinas is trying to show that it's more reasonable to believe in God than to remain agnostic. That these things exist, he believes, he demonstrates with necessity. Given that we know the universe has a necessary source of being and of movement and of causality, which is supremely good and intelligent, it's far more reasonable to be a theist than to be an atheist or to remain agnostic. That's mainly his point here. Second, the principle of sufficient reason makes perfect sense when applied within the universe, but it makes no sense whatsoever when applied to the universe as a whole. The question, why is there something rather than nothing, the objection goes, is a pseudo question and a category mistake. We should accept that the existence of the universe is a brute fact. If the principle of sufficient reason is denied, if PSR is denied, specifically as a tool of metaphysics, a cosmological argument, they argue, cannot be constructed. Jean-Paul Sartre, for instance, felt that the universe was gratuitous. It is, and it just is, and there's no explanation for it. Bertrand Russell claimed that questions of the origins of the universe are tangled in meaningless verbiage and that we must be content to declare that the universe just is there, and that's all. 20th century philosophy, J.L. Mackie states, perhaps it, principle about causality, principle of sufficient reason, just expresses an arbitrary demand. It may be intellectually satisfying to believe that there is, objectively, an explanation for everything together, even if we can only guess what that explanation might be. But we have no right to assume that the universe will comply with our intellectual preferences. So just because we want there to be an explanation doesn't necessarily mean there is one. Response. Still, the principle of sufficient reason has served us well and continues to serve us well in science and medicine and auto mechanics. I mean, when I take my car to the mechanic and I say, please find out why it won't start, I'm assuming he's going to look and look and look until he determines the reason why it won't start. I'm not going to accept the fact where he says, oh, there's no reason, it's a brute fact. Are we really to ignore the unquestionable usefulness and centuries of success of the principle of sufficient reason? Doesn't this seem sort of like a case of special pleading, merely to avoid having to admit the existence of a necessary being? So what motivates this rejection of the principle of sufficient reason, if nothing other than, well, I just don't want to believe in a God? Why should we accept that the existence of the universe is indeed a brute fact? Isn't it an arbitrary stipulation manufactured just to avoid assenting to the existence of God? Further, even some scientists are interested in asking and perhaps even answering the question, why is there something rather than nothing? For instance, consider grand unification theory quest of some physicists, not as popular as it was once upon a time, but still with us. For instance, Stephen Hawking once wrote in his A Brief History of Time, quote, if we do discover the complete theory, it should in time be understandable in broad principle to everyone, and not just a few scientists. Then we shall all, philosophers, scientists, and just ordinary people, be able to take part in the discussion of the question of why is it that the universe exists at all? If we find the answer to that, it would be the ultimate triumph of human reason, for then we would know the mind of God. My point here is Stephen Hawking was a pretty bright guy. He wasn't trying to do philosophy, he was just trying to do physics, and yet he thinks the question, why is there something rather than nothing, is not a category mistake, but a scientific question that maybe could be answered by science itself. Further still, it's not clear at all that Aquinas' argument turns on the principle of sufficient reason. As I've already mentioned, I don't believe that it does. Notice Rowe uses it, but Aquinas did not mention it. Third, concepts like move, cause, exist, and time are only concepts that arise from human intellect and apply only to human experience. To try to apply them, these concepts, to the world as it is, that is, to the world as uncategorized by the concepts of mind, is analytically impossible. Further, it is an attempt to use them outside their rightful, useful jurisdiction. So David Hume, for instance, argues that causation is a psychological, not a metaphysical principle, one whose origins lay in human propensity to assume necessary connections between events when all we really see is contiguity and succession. So we have a psychological predisposition to predicate causality of the events we see, even though we have no justification, scientific, empirical, or metaphysical, to make such claims. In a similar way, and if causation is a psychological propensity and not an objective fact, then we cannot reason to any objective uncaused cause. In a similar way, Immanuel Kant echoes Hume here by arguing that causation is a category of thought built into our minds as one of the many ways in which we constitute our experiences to ourselves. This has the same result of limiting the jurisdiction of the concept of causality to the realm of human experience only. And we can't transport that concept to the realm of things in themselves, the metaphysical realm. Response: this is an objection to metaphysics generally, not to this particular argument, not to the cosmological argument per se. So I take it to be a challenging objection, but it's not merely an objection to the cosmological argument, it's an objection to the reality or the legitimacy of metaphysics. As such, it would require a general defense of metaphysics as a legitimate form of inquiry. Finally, I found the place in the Critique of Pure Reason where Kant says that the cosmological argument is dependent on the ontological argument and therefore can be dismissed as the latter was. And I won't go into this, it's in the notes or whatnot, but the general idea here is that he says the very idea of the cosmological argument presupposes the existence of a necessary being. But I've already given you my reasons for thinking the very notion of a necessary being is illegitimate. It presumes that existence becomes part of the essence of a thing. But existence is not a descriptive predicate. Therefore, existence can't be part of the essence of anything. Therefore, we can't know a thing to exist necessarily. And the very concept of a necessarily existing thing is illegitimate, and any argument which presumes the existence of a necessary being is illegitimate. So that seems to be the gist of his argument here. All right, so that kind of leads us to the end of my presentation today. Hope you found this helpful to you. It's a little long, I understand that. It's a little detailed, perhaps a little thorny, but naturally, if you have any questions or want to discuss any of this with me, I'd be happy to engage with you. So, with that having been said, have a pleasant rest of your day.